This story is titled, My Wife Abandoned Me to Find Herself. When she came back, she found divorce papers waiting instead. Now she is begging me to reconsider. Hey everyone, before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. Hey everyone, I don't really know how to start this, so I'll just dive right in. I've been sitting on this story for a while now, and I don't know if it's because I'm still trying to process everything, or because I've been so busy holding my life together. Either way, here we are. So, I'm 48 male, my wife Donna, 47 woman. We've been married for 25 years. Well, almost 25 years, if that still even counts anymore. We've got 2 great kids, a daughter, 22, finishing college, and a son, 20, who's in the military. Life wasn't perfect, but we made it work. And for most of those years, I thought we were a team. The last 5 years or so have been hard, though. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Donna's mom developed dementia in her early 60s, and when her dad passed away, there was really no one else to take care of her. So, Donna asked if we could move her in. And look, I'm not a monster. I didn't love the idea, but I knew how important it was to her, and I agreed. What I didn't realize back then was how much it would take out of both of us. Anyone who's cared for someone with dementia knows exactly what I'm talking about. The days become this endless loop of helping, reminding, and cleaning up messes. Just imagine you're constantly exhausted, watching someone you care about slip away a little more every day. Donna took it the hardest. She was constantly stressed, worrying about her mom, and worrying that she'd end up the same way. During COVID, it was like we were trapped in a bubble of stress. Both of us worked from home, so there was no escaping it. Her mom would wander around the house, forgetting where she was, or she'd get upset over something small and completely lose it. Donna would cry at night sometimes, telling me she didn't think she could handle it anymore, and I'd sit there and tell her we were in it together. When her mom finally moved into a memory care facility earlier this year, I thought, okay, we've made it through the worst of it. Things are going to get better now. But the damage was already done. Donna wasn't the same. She felt guilty for putting her mom in another home. She told me she felt like time was slipping away from her, like she didn't have long before dementia got her too. I tried to reassure her, but nothing I said ever seemed to land. We'd always talked about traveling once the kids were out of the house and her mom was taken care of. That was the plan. We'd sell the house, quit our jobs, and travel the world together. We even had a timeline. Summer of 2023. We saved for it. We talked about it for years. I still remember when Donna said that one day, it'll just be you, me, and the open road. She talked about driving through small towns, staying in little bed and breakfasts, and waking up without a plan. We'd sit for hours, imagining places we'd go. Greece, Italy, the Grand Canyon. She'd get this look on her face like she could already see it, and I believed her. I thought it was something we were both looking forward to. I thought we were both still on the same page. Then, one day, I came home from running some errands and saw something sitting on the kitchen table. A letter. I didn't think much of it at first. I figured it was some mail she left out for me. But when I opened it, my stomach dropped. It said, I'm sorry. I need to find myself. I love you, but I can't keep living like this. Please try to understand. I'll be back when I'm ready. I can't even describe what it felt like reading that. I actually stood there for a minute, holding the note, trying to process it. Like, I couldn't understand the words I was seeing. She left, just like that. No fight, no warning, no discussion, just gone. I looked around the house, and that's when I started processing things. Half her clothes were gone. Some of her favorite things were missing. It wasn't like she'd gone to stay with a friend for a weekend. She left. I tried calling her. Straight to voicemail. I texted her too, asking where she was, asking if she was okay. No response. My brain went into panic mode, running through every possibility. Did something happen? Was she safe? Then I checked our bank accounts. That's when I saw it. She'd taken most of our savings. It wasn't just her money. It was our money. Money we'd saved for years for that trip we were supposed to take together. I can't even tell you what I felt seeing that number. Shock, anger, betrayal. Like every emotion just hit me at once. For the next couple of days, I couldn't focus on anything. I kept trying to reach her, but it was like she disappeared off the face of the earth. Then, a week later, my daughter was pacing around the kitchen, phone in hand, shaking her head like she couldn't believe what she was looking at. Dad, she looks happy. How does she look happy? She turned her phone to me, showing the picture of Donna, laughing with a bunch of strangers. There was Donna, sitting on a beach somewhere, sunglasses on, surrounded by people I didn't recognize, total strangers. Not a single familiar face. I remember staring at their fake smiles and thinking, who are these people? Like, how do you just up and join a group of randoms when you've got a whole family at home? The caption read, "Cheers to freedom, new beginnings, and finding happiness." I don't know what kind of freedom she thought she was celebrating, but it sure as hell wasn't mine. Does she not care about us at all? My daughter asked, her voice cracking. I didn't know how to answer. What was I supposed to say? That the woman who raised her, who sat at her soccer games, who hugged her through every heartbreak, had just up and left? I put my hand on her shoulder and said, I don't know, kiddo. I wish I had an answer. She didn't cry. Instead, she muttered, I don't even know who she is anymore, before walking back to her room and slamming the door. That hit me harder than anything. Seeing my daughter, who used to idolize her mom, look at her like she was a stranger. It wasn't just the money. It was the fact that she chose to leave. She didn't just walk out on me. She walked out on her family, on the life we built together for 25 years. She didn't even care how this would affect our kids. And she didn't care that I was the one left picking up the pieces. For days, I kept staring at my phone, waiting for a text, a call, something. But it never came. And that's when I started to realize something that stuck with me ever since. Donna didn't leave because of me. She left because she doesn't want to be responsible anymore. And that's when the real mess started. The next couple of days were chaos. I checked every joint account we had and realized she'd been planning this for a while. It seems that she planned carefully for our trip that turned out to be hers. She drained nearly all of our shared savings, money we'd been putting aside for years. Our future, poof, gone. I tried calling her again, straight to voicemail. I sent texts, nothing. It was like she disappeared. My daughter, who was still in college at the time, tried reaching out too. She got one text back. Donna said, I love you, but I need this. You'll understand when you're older. Tell your brother I'm okay. Understand? Understand what? That my wife just quit her life and family so she could play single and free? Yeah, no. It got worse when Donna started posting more on Instagram. She wasn't just at some random beach. There were cruises, nights out at clubs, dinners at fancy restaurants. Stuff that we were supposed to do together. In every picture, she was surrounded by this group of people who clearly had zero responsibilities. I don't know how she found them. Were they some old friends I'd never met? Some online group? All I knew was she looked like she was having the time of her life. The captions were even worse. Stuff like, you only get one life. Don't waste it. Thankful for friends who lift you up. Lift you up? Where were they when we were dealing with her mom? Where were they when she was crying at night, worried she'd end up with dementia? I guess those friends are only fun when you've got money to spend and nothing tying you down. But there's one post that made me lose my shit, she actually said. Grateful for my amazing husband, who understands and supports me through this journey. I wanted to throw my phone across the room. I wasn't supporting anything. I didn't even know where she was. It was like she was trying to paint this picture where I was just smiling at home, waving her off like this was all part of some big plan. Meanwhile, I was scrambling to figure out how to pay the bills she left me with. The mortgage was due. The car payments were due. The utilities didn't care that my wife ran off with most of our money. I'd always been careful with finances, but I never expected I'd have to run this household on my own, with zero warning. After a few weeks, I started to see the bigger picture. Donna didn't just find herself. She was running away from the life we built, from the hard parts, from the responsibilities. I thought we'd been a team through all of this, but now I realized she'd been stewing in resentment for years, and instead of talking to me like an adult, she bolted. I sat down with my kids to explain everything. I didn't want them to hear my side through bitterness, but I also wasn't going to lie for her. My son, who's stationed across the country, was pissed. I could hear it in his voice. He actually called me before, his voice tight with frustration. Dad, what the hell is going on? I just got a text from Mom, and she's acting like everything's fine. She sent me a picture of a damn sunset and wrote, Hope you're doing well, miss you. Miss me? What does that even mean? He paused, and I could hear him take a breath to calm down. Dad, she doesn't get to pretend like this isn't a big deal. She doesn't get to send me pictures of sunsets like nothing's wrong. You're right, I told him. She doesn't. So has she talked to you? Given you a real reason? I wanted to say something that would ease his anger, but there wasn't anything to say. No, I admitted. She left a note, took the money, and disappeared. I don't get it, Dad. How do you do that? How do you just leave your family like that? I don't know, son, I replied, trying to keep my own voice steady. I don't know. And my daughter, though, she just kept shaking her head, scrolling through her mom's Instagram like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Dad, this isn't normal, she said. Mom's acting like she's 25, running around with these people. I didn't say it out loud, but I was thinking the same thing. Donna looked younger than she was, and she'd always been kind of obsessed with staying that way. She took care of herself, worked out, always put effort into looking good. I used to admire that about her. Now, though, it just seemed like she wanted to erase the life we'd spent decades building. The irresponsibility of it all blew my mind. Here's a woman who spent years complaining that we couldn't do this or that because we had too many responsibilities. And now she was just throwing it all out the window. Like the rest of us were still here, living in the same reality she decided to bail on. It's not like I expected her to act like a martyr, but I also didn't think she'd just abandon us. That's the part I couldn't wrap my head around. She'd always been the organized one, the planner, and yet she left everything behind without thinking twice. The thing that really got me, though? She was texting our daughter every few days with things like, "I miss you. I just need time. I'll come back when I'm ready." Like she was off on some spiritual retreat, not living it up with her new group of friends in Bali or wherever she'd ended up. Ready for what, though? To come home and pretend nothing happened? She really believed that after all this, she could just waltz back into our lives like we'd been waiting for her return. That's when the anger started to settle in. At first, I was too shocked to feel anything but confused, but now? Now I was starting to see Donna for what she was doing. She wasn't just lost or confused. She was being selfish, plain and simple. And if she thought I'd sit here forever, waiting for her to figure herself out, she was dead wrong. After a month of watching my wife live it up on social media like some influencer on a permanent vacation, I finally started to accept the reality of it. What really got under my skin wasn't just that she'd left, it was how shameless she was about it. Every time I thought she couldn't possibly surprise me anymore, she'd post something new. It's one thing to leave, but it's another to make it look like you're a free spirit just living your truth, while your husband's at home drowning in bills and your kids don't even know what to think. One day, she posted a video on her story. It was a bunch of her women and some men friends. In the background, you could hear someone saying, "Donna, you've got to stay with us for the New Year's party." And she said, "Oh, I'm not going anywhere. I'm free now." Free. That word again. Like she'd been shackled to something for 25 years instead of being part of a marriage, raising kids, building a life. It made my blood boil. I vented to a couple of close friends, and they all said the same thing. "You need to talk to a lawyer." The thing was, I'd already done that. I sat down with my lawyer the week after Donna left. She told me that legally there wasn't much I could do yet, because technically she hadn't abandoned anything but me. If I wanted a divorce, I'd have to wait for her to come back, or at least make herself available to be served papers. In the meantime, I shut down every credit card she could still use, froze anything she might try to access, and made sure her phone was off our family plan. The phone thing turned out to be pretty genius on my part, because when I blocked international calling, she ended up removing herself from the plan completely. Small victories, I guess. A couple of weeks later, I heard from my daughter. She called me after getting off the phone with Donna, her voice shaking with frustration. Apparently, Donna told her something along the lines of, "I just need to live before it's too late. You'll understand one day when you have your own family." That sent me over the edge. My daughter, bless her, tried to talk some sense into her. She told Donna how hurt we all were, how this wasn't just her life to run away from. And what did Donna say? "I need to be selfish right now. I'll come back when I'm ready." Selfish? No kidding. It wasn't long after that conversation that I saw her post something about being in Bali with her tribe. Her tribe. She had a new word for her group of freeloaders now. I swear she sounded like someone who'd read too many self-help books. Here I was, working long days to keep the house and cars paid for, making sure our kids didn't completely spiral from this, and she was dancing barefoot at some beach bonfire with her new tribe. No responsibilities, no shame. At one point, I actually started wondering if she planned any of this out before she left. Did she meet these people online? Were they some kind of group who convinced her to run away? The more I thought about it, the more it felt like she'd been preparing for months. She must have had the trip planned. She must have been talking to these people. Hell, she probably quit her job weeks before I even noticed she was unhappy. But the thing is, whenever I tried asking her for an address to send her legal paperwork, because yes, I was done waiting, she texted back, "We'll talk about it when I'm ready to come back." She actually believed she could just waltz back into our lives, like we'd all been sitting around waiting for her to find herself. I guess that Donna didn't think she'd done anything wrong. In her mind, this was all perfectly justified. She deserved this, and we were supposed to understand. The entitlement was insane. By the end of that month, I'd had enough. The anger was starting to outweigh the confusion. This wasn't some midlife crisis anymore. This was who she was now. And I wasn't about to sit here and play the role of the supportive husband. So, the next day, I called my lawyer again. I told her I was ready to file for divorce. She has to find a way. No more waiting, no more hoping. I wanted out. She told me we couldn't officially file yet because Donna was still off-grid, but we could have everything ready to go. The papers were drawn up, asset division, repayment for the money she took, the whole thing. The lawyer explained that since I'd been keeping up with the mortgage and the bills alone, the courts would likely factor that in. The plan was simple. When Donna came back, because eventually she'd get served. No explanations, no apologies, just papers. I'll be honest, deciding to divorce her wasn't easy. You don't spend 25 years with someone and just let that go overnight. But I wasn't the one who left. I wasn't the one who drained our savings and posted selfies with random strangers in Bali, while my family picked up the pieces. Donna made her choice. Now I was making mine. Thanksgiving was coming up, and I wasn't sure what to do at first. My daughter didn't want to stay home. Too many memories of family dinners with her mom. I didn't blame her. My son couldn't come back from his base, so it was just the two of us. Then, out of nowhere, Donna's sister called me. She invited us to their house for Thanksgiving. At first, I didn't know what to say. Wouldn't it be weird? I didn't want to show up and have everyone staring at me, wondering what Donna was doing. But her sister said something that stuck with me. Don't let her choices stop you from having a family. So I said yes. We drove up to Donna's sister's house the day before Thanksgiving. I was nervous as hell, but when we walked in, it wasn't awkward. It wasn't weird. Donna's family hugged me, hugged my daughter, and treated us like nothing had changed. I think they were embarrassed by what Donna had done, but no one talked about it directly. They just welcomed us in and tried to make it a good day. At one point, Donna's mom's name came up in conversation, and I thought it might get weird, but instead, her brother put his hand on my shoulder and said, "You did right by her, man." We all know that. That was the first time in months that I didn't feel completely alone. My daughter and I sat around the table, eating and laughing with everyone, and I wondered if Donna even realized what she'd thrown away. She wasn't there, but we were, and we still felt like a family. When we got back home, my daughter posted a picture of us from Thanksgiving. Just a normal photo of us smiling with her aunt and uncle. Nothing shady, nothing dramatic. I didn't think much of it, until Donna texted my daughter 2 days later. "I saw the picture. I hope you're both okay. I'll be back for Christmas. We'll talk then." I didn't even need to say anything. My daughter just showed me the text and said, "She's got some nerve." I smiled a little and shook my head. Because what Donna didn't know was that by Christmas, I'd be ready. The papers were ready. My lawyer was ready. And when she came back thinking we'd talk, she was in for a surprise. The weeks leading up to Christmas were quieter than I expected. I wasn't hearing much from Donna. She wasn't posting as much on Instagram either. No beach pictures, no group dinners, nothing. It was like she was winding down, but not in a good way. I started wondering what was next for her. Did she think this little escape was going to last forever? She had no job, no home, as far as I knew, and she'd burned through most of the money she took. Maybe reality was catching up to her. In the meantime, I was preparing for her return. My lawyer and I made sure the divorce papers were ready to go. She explained that since I'd been paying for the mortgage, bills, and everything else, the courts would take that into consideration. Donna would owe me for what she took, and we'd split assets based on what was fair, not what she thought she was entitled to. I also made sure the house was locked down. The locks were changed. The security code was updated. The emergency key that used to be hidden under the flower pot? Gone. I wasn't taking any chances. I didn't know what to expect when Donna came back, but I knew one thing. She wasn't walking back into my house like she still lived here. I tried to keep my daughter in the loop as much as I could without putting too much weight on her shoulders. She was already angry with her mom, and I didn't want to make it worse. One night, she asked me if I thought Donna really meant to come back for Christmas. She said she'll be here, I told her, so I'm ready for her. Do you think she'll be sorry? I thought about that for a second before I answered. I don't know, but even if she is, it doesn't change what she did. A few days before Christmas, I got another text from Donna. Short and simple. "I'll be in town on the 23rd. Let's talk." That was it. No apology. No explanation. Just, let's talk. I stared at that text for a while, half expecting to feel something. Anger, maybe. Sadness. But there was nothing. If anything, I felt relieved. Relieved that I finally had a plan, that I wasn't waiting around anymore. I texted back one word. Okay. The truth is, there was nothing left to talk about. Donna didn't understand that yet, but she would. When she showed up on my doorstep thinking we were going to have some long, emotional conversation, I'd be handing her the divorce papers. Christmas was going to be different this year, but I was ready for it. On the 23rd, I cleaned up the house, made sure everything was in order, and sat down to wait. My daughter was at her friend's place for the night, which was probably for the best. I didn't want her to see what was about to go down. When I finally heard the doorbell ring, my heart was pounding, but I kept my face calm. I opened the door, and there she was, Donna, standing there like nothing had changed. She looked good, of course. She always did. but there was something in her eyes, like maybe she was expecting me to be happy to see her. I didn't say anything at first. I just looked at her. "Hi," she said, smiling a little, like this was just another day. I didn't smile back. I reached behind me, grabbed the manila envelope off the table, and handed it to her. "What's this?" she asked, her smile fading. "Divorce papers," I said. Donna blinked like she hadn't heard me right. "What? Why?" I looked her dead in the eyes and said, "You left. You made your choice. This is mine." And just like that, the conversation was over. She stood there frozen. I don't know what she expected when she showed up, but it definitely wasn't that. For a second, I thought she might start crying, but instead she looked at the envelope in her hands and said, "You didn't have to do this." That one line almost made me lose it. "I didn't have to?" I repeated. "You left. You took our savings, ran off with strangers, and acted like I was fine with it. You're the one who did this, Donna, not me." She opened her mouth like she was going to argue, but then she stopped. For the first time in months, I think she realized how far gone everything was. She stepped back a little, like she couldn't decide if she wanted to come in or leave. "Can I come inside?" she finally asked, her voice quieter now. "No," I said. I wasn't rude about it. I wasn't yelling or being dramatic. I was just done. Done letting her make the rules. Done letting her walk in and out of my life like nothing happened. For a moment, we just stood there, her on the porch and me in the doorway. She looked around like she was taking in the house, the yard, the home she'd abandoned. I wondered what was going through her mind. Was she regretting it? Was she embarrassed? Did she even care? "Can we at least talk?" she asked. "Please?" I sighed, feeling more tired than angry. "There's nothing left to talk about, Donna. The papers say everything you need to know." She stared at me for another moment, then looked down at the envelope again. Without another word, she turned and walked back to her car. I watched her drive away. Christmas Eve was quiet. My daughter came home, and we spent the night watching movies and wrapping a few gifts. I didn't bring up Donna, and neither did she. We were both tired of talking about it. At one point, my daughter asked me, "Do you think Mom's going to sign the papers?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "But either way, we're moving forward." Donna was gone. Maybe she'd been gone long before she physically left. Maybe the woman I married was already slipping away, 1 year at a time, while I was too busy holding everything together to notice. Either way, she wasn't coming back. Not really. And that was okay. The following weeks were all about tying up loose ends. My lawyer let me know that we could move forward with the divorce even if Donna refused to cooperate. I didn't expect her to fight it, though. She'd been too busy chasing sunsets and vague ideas of freedom to care about what came next. By mid-January, Donna finally signed the papers. No message, no explanation, just her signature at the bottom of the page. When my lawyer called to tell me it was done, I didn't feel the relief I thought I would. It wasn't some big moment where I threw my fists in the air and celebrated. It just felt like closing a door that had been cracked open for too long. I hope she finds whatever it is she thinks she's chasing. I really do, but it won't be with me. It's been a few months now, and life feels steady. The house is quieter, but in a good way. I ended up selling it, downsized to a smaller place that doesn't feel so empty. I started seeing friends again, picked up a few hobbies I'd let fall to the side over the years. My kids are doing okay too. My daughter's about to graduate, and my son's thriving in the military. We've all settled into this new reality, and honestly, it's better than I expected. Looking back, I don't regret the years I spent with Donna. I don't regret the sacrifices, the hard times, or even the good ones. What I regret is letting myself believe I had to hold it all together on my own, that I had to wait for her to decide she was done finding herself to get my life back. I didn't, and I'm finally starting to see that. So, to anyone out there dealing with something similar, waiting for someone who's already made their choice, let me tell you this. You don't have to wait. You don't have to hold on to something that's already gone. Sometimes letting go is the best thing you can do. And for me, that's exactly what I did. Thanks for reading until the very end. Trusted my girlfriend with my mental struggles. She had me put in a psych hold, and now she tell me this. So yeah, I'm not exactly in the best spot right now. I'm 29, working this job that's supposed to pay the bills and give me some sense of purpose. But let's be real, it barely does either. I'm busting my ass for what? To barely scrape by? I'm pretty sure a lot of people reading this get what I'm saying. It's like you're just grinding away, hoping things will get easier, but they don't. And maybe for some people that's just life, right? But for me, it's been different lately, like way darker. I don't know exactly when this whole mental mess started. I mean, I'd love to say I was some super happy dude who suddenly woke up to a bad day and everything went downhill, but it's not that simple. It's more like a slow crawl into this weird dark pit. Like, one day you realize the thoughts you're having aren't just the regular man, this sucks kind of thoughts. They're like, What's the point, you know? And it's terrifying because I don't actually want to hurt myself. I'm not actively planning anything, but my mind keeps going there even when I don't want it to. It's like it's sneaking up on me when I'm not paying attention. It's what they call suicidal ideation, which basically means these thoughts just creep up, even though I have zero plans to actually do anything. I'll try to paint a picture for you because maybe some of you haven't been there, and it might sound overdramatic. It's like this constant weight on my mind. Some days I'd wake up and go to work, go through the motions, but inside it's like a switch flipped. Everything's numb, like I'm just going through the day on autopilot. It's weird because nobody can see it. To everyone else, I'm just the same guy, doing my job, showing up. But inside, it's like everything's gray, heavy, and no matter what I do, I can't shake it. I thought I could just push through, honestly. I mean, I've dealt with stress before, right? But this is different. Usually I just throw myself into work, keep busy, try to ignore the bad stuff, and hope it goes away. But no matter how hard I worked or distracted myself, these thoughts just kept creeping back in. It's like trying to keep a lid on a pot that's already boiling over. You can push it down for a while, but eventually it's going to spill. I'd get these thoughts too at the worst times. Like I'm standing at work, supposed to be paying attention, and suddenly my mind's just drifting off, thinking about how easy it'd be to just disappear. And I'd snap out of it, thinking, what the hell is wrong with me? But then it'd happen again and again. It starts messing with your head. I'd go home and just sit there, trying to figure out why I can't shake it off. Why I can't just, I don't know, be happy? Or at least normal? It's this constant battle in my head and I'm losing. I know, it sounds dramatic. But if you've ever been there, you get it. And if you haven't, trust me when I say it's not something I'd wish on anyone. It's like being trapped in this invisible cage, and no matter what you do, you can't get out. Every day, it's just this fight to keep going, to keep pretending everything's okay when deep down, you know it's not. And the scariest part? I didn't tell anyone, not a single soul, because who wants to hear that? Who wants to be the person that people look at and think, oh, he's broken? So I kept it all in, hoping it'd just go away. And then came the worst days. These are the ones that really stick with me. I'd come home after a long day, exhausted, and just sit there staring at the wall. Not even thinking, just staring. My phone would buzz, people trying to reach out, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. It was like every ounce of energy I had was used up just to get through the day, and I had nothing left for anyone else. I'd sit in silence, sometimes for hours, with this voice in the back of my head whispering that it'd be easier to just give up. Not that I'd ever actually do it, but the thought was always there, lurking, like some shadow I couldn't get rid of. After a few months of this, I started to realize that maybe I couldn't handle this on my own. And let me tell you, that was a hard pill to swallow. I've always been the guy who deals with his own stuff, who doesn't rely on anyone else. But this was different. It wasn't something I could just shrug off or ignore. So, after a lot of back and forth in my own head, I finally decided to open up to my girlfriend. I mean, we've been together for 4 years, and she's always been there for me. If there was anyone who'd understand, it'd be her, right? So, one night, we're just sitting on the couch watching some mindless TV show, and I decided to go for it. I told her I'd been struggling lately, that things felt dark, and that I'd been having these thoughts. And let me tell you, that was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I could barely get the words out. I was so damn worried about how she'd react, but I didn't have anyone else I could trust with this. She just sat there listening, and I thought, okay, maybe this'll actually help. I kept explaining, trying to make her understand that I wasn't planning anything, that I just needed someone to hear me out. And she nodded, said she understood, and I actually felt a bit of relief, like maybe I'd finally found a way to dig myself out of this hole. I thought, maybe this'll be okay, maybe I'll be okay. Looking back, maybe I shouldn't have expected so much. I mean, she's young, only 22, and probably didn't know how to handle something like this. But at that moment, I genuinely thought I'd done the right thing by telling her. For the first time in a while, I felt like maybe I wasn't so alone in this. I thought opening up was the first step to getting better, that I'd finally found a way to deal with these thoughts and move forward. But as I'd come to learn, things weren't that simple. So I left off where I finally opened up to my girlfriend. Honestly, I felt this weird sense of relief after telling her everything, like maybe this was finally the first step to pulling myself out of that mental mess. But what happened next was something I didn't see coming at all. After our talk, I was feeling, I don't know, lighter, I guess. I figured I'd go grab some snacks and clear my head for a bit, so I told her I'd be right back. It was just a quick trip down the street, something to get my mind off things. I thought everything was fine between us, like maybe we'd broken through a wall or something. I wasn't expecting her to do anything drastic, but by the time I came back, the whole situation flipped in a way I'd never imagined. I pull into my driveway and immediately notice two cop cars parked outside my house, and I'm just sitting there in my car, staring at these flashing lights, totally confused. My first thought was maybe there was some kind of emergency in the neighborhood or something, but when I got out of the car, one of the officers approached me, and he had this look like he already knew exactly who I was. "Are you my name?" he asks, and I'm just nodding, still not processing any of it. I mean, my heart's racing, and I'm running through every possible thing that could have gone wrong. Then he says, "We got a call from someone concerned for your safety." Right then it clicked. I knew this wasn't about anything outside. It was about me. My girlfriend had called the cops on me, and suddenly that feeling of relief I'd had just a few minutes ago, completely gone. I felt betrayed, like I'd let her into my head, and she'd taken that trust and turned it against me. I tried to explain to the officers that it was a misunderstanding. I told them I wasn't planning on doing anything to myself, that I'd just been going through a rough time, and I'd talked to her about it thinking it'd help. But they weren't hearing any of it. They kept insisting that they were there to help and that it was for my own good. At this point, I was pissed. But what could I do? They told me they were going to take me to the hospital for a psychiatric evaluation, and it wasn't really up for discussion. I tried to argue, but it was like talking to a wall. One of them said, "Look, we're just here to make sure you're safe." Safe? I'd been sitting in my car, getting snacks, and now I was supposed to be some kind of danger to myself? It didn't make sense, but they didn't care about any of that. They just followed protocol. Then it hits me. If the cops are here, who else did she tell? And right on cue, my phone buzzes. It's my mom, freaking out in a million texts, asking me what's going on, why I'm in such a bad place, and all this stuff. Turns out, my girlfriend had called my parents too. I'm guessing she thought they'd support her decision to call the cops, maybe thinking this was what I needed or whatever. But all I felt was this wave of anger and frustration. The people who were supposed to be there for me, my girlfriend and my family, had somehow all turned into, I don't even know what, but definitely not the support I thought I needed. So there I am, being escorted by the cops to the hospital. I'm sitting in the back of a police car like some criminal, even though I'd done nothing wrong. I'm fuming, but I don't even know who I'm mad at more. My girlfriend for putting me in this mess or myself for thinking I could trust anyone with what I was going through. We get to the hospital, and they bring me to this side area, and the nurse is already there waiting. She starts asking me a bunch of questions about my mental state, how I'm feeling, all that stuff, and I'm sitting there thinking, none of this is real. Like, this whole situation just feels like a twisted joke. I told the nurse straight up that I wasn't planning on hurting myself, that this was all some misunderstanding blown way out of proportion. But she just nods and says, "Well, we'll need to do a full evaluation to make sure." The whole time, all I could think was how everything just spiraled out of control. I'd opened up to my girlfriend, thinking it would help, and here I was in some cold clinical room being treated like a danger to myself. They took my phone, my wallet, everything. It felt surreal, like I'd somehow lost control of my own life just because I was honest for once. I mean, isn't that what everyone says to do? Talk to someone if you're struggling. But look where that got me. And of course, the waiting game started. I sat in this tiny, uncomfortable room for hours, with nothing to do but replay everything in my head, every thought, every detail of that conversation with my girlfriend. I kept wondering if there was something I could have said differently, something that wouldn't have set off this chain reaction. But no matter how I tried to make sense of it, it just didn't add up. She knew I wasn't actively planning anything, and I thought I'd made that clear. So why call the cops? Why call my parents? Why blow everything up? At some point, a doctor came in and started the whole evaluation process. He was calm, asked me about my thoughts, how long I'd been feeling like this, and all that. I answered as best as I could, but it's hard to explain something you're barely understanding yourself. I could see him jotting down notes, looking up every now and then, and it was obvious he didn't really get it. He kept asking questions in this clinical, detached way that just made me feel even worse. Like I was just another case he was trying to check off his list. By the time they finally wrapped up the initial evaluation, I was drained, both physically and mentally. I didn't have the energy to keep explaining myself, and I just accepted that nobody was really going to understand. They weren't interested in helping. They were just doing what they were supposed to do. Protocol, procedures, checklists. I was just another number to them. I'm not going to lie. Sitting in that room with nothing to do but stare at the walls, I felt betrayed. Completely. I kept thinking about my girlfriend, my family, the people who were supposed to care. I'd trusted them, opened up in a way I'd never done before, and now, here I was, alone in some sterile room, treated like a danger to myself when all I wanted was someone to actually listen, to understand. But instead, I was labeled and sorted into some category, and now they had me stuck in this mess. By the time they told me I'd have to stay for further observation, I wasn't even surprised. It was like the whole thing had taken on a life of its own, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I just sat there, feeling defeated, wondering if I'd ever be able to look at these people in my life the same way again. I'm not sure how to describe the feeling of being admitted into a psych ward, especially when you're there against your will. The second they took my phone and wallet, I realized how little control I had left. You think of hospitals as these places where they're supposed to help you, right? Well, this place didn't feel like help. It felt like prison. Everything was cold and gray, like the entire building was designed to drain whatever hope you had left. And the people? They treated you like you were already broken beyond repair. After what felt like hours of waiting around, they finally brought me to this cramped room that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. It had a single bed with a thin mattress, a chair, and a tiny table. The walls were this faded beige color, peeling in spots, and there was this smell, a mix of bleach and something stale. I sat on the bed, staring at the walls, trying to wrap my head around how I'd ended up here. The staff, they didn't talk to you unless they absolutely had to. It's like they didn't see you as a person, just another case they were dealing with. I tried asking one of the nurses how long I'd have to be here, and she just shrugged, mumbled something about evaluations, and walked away. No explanations, no real answers, just cold, blank stares and people moving around like you're invisible. Then came the worst part. My roommate. I don't know what I expected, but definitely not him. The guy was convinced he was some kind of god or prophet or something, always muttering to himself and occasionally screaming at the walls. First night in, I woke up to him smashing his head against the wall, leaving these bloody smears as he went. When I asked the staff if he was okay, they just brushed it off like it was no big deal. He does that sometimes, one of them said, completely unfazed. The whole experience was like that. There was no peace, no privacy, nothing that made you feel even a little bit human. The light stayed on 24/7, and someone checked on you every half hour, so sleep was impossible. I'd lie there, exhausted but unable to drift off, listening to the sounds of other patients shuffling down the hall, doors creaking, and that constant hum of fluorescent lights. Every noise, every shadow, it was like the place was designed to keep you on edge. Meals were another level of awful. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner were all this tasteless gray mush that they insisted was balanced. I tried eating at first, but I could barely get it down. After a day or so, I just stopped bothering. What was the point? It felt like I was being punished, like I'd done something wrong, even though all I'd done was open up to someone I thought I could trust. And then there were the meds. Oh man, the meds. The doctors had decided I needed something to calm me down, despite me telling them over and over that I wasn't a danger to myself. But it didn't matter. They had their system, and I was just another tick on their checklist. They handed me these pills without even telling me what they were. When I refused to take them, they just stared at me and said, "You either take these, or we'll have to use other measures." Basically, they were going to force feed me the stuff if I didn't cooperate. So yeah, I took them. And let me tell you, whatever they gave me, it was brutal. Within half an hour, I felt like my brain was wrapped in cotton. Everything was blurry and slow. I couldn't think straight. Couldn't even string together a full sentence. It was like I was floating somewhere outside myself, watching this whole nightmare unfold, but completely powerless to do anything about it. They'd call it treatment, but to me, it felt like they were stripping away any shred of control I had left. I spent 3 days in that place. 3 long, miserable days where the only thing I did was sit in that dingy room and stare at the walls. The staff tried to get me to talk, but I wasn't interested. I knew they weren't listening. Not really. I'd already told them the truth, but they didn't care. I was just another body they had to deal with. So I clammed up, refused to speak, and just waited for it to be over. On the second day, my parents and girlfriend came by to visit. I saw them through the tiny window in my room, talking to one of the nurses, probably asking to see me. But I didn't want to see them. I was done with them. They were the ones who put me here, who decided this was what I needed, without even asking me how I felt about it. So when the nurse came to tell me I had visitors, I just shook my head and said I wasn't interested. I could see the nurse's face drop. like maybe she thought I was being ungrateful or something. But I didn't care. I was angry. Angry at all of them for thinking they knew what was best for me. Angry that I'd let myself trust them enough to open up, only to have it backfire in the worst way possible. They didn't understand. And at that point, I wasn't sure I even wanted them to. Time felt strange in that place. It was like everything slowed down and blurred together. Hours felt like days, and every second I was there, I felt more and more trapped. It was like being in some kind of twisted purgatory where you're just stuck with no way out. The only thing that kept me going was knowing that eventually, they'd have to let me go. I hadn't done anything wrong. I wasn't a danger to myself, and they had no proof to keep me there. By the end of it, I was so mentally and physically drained that I barely recognized myself. I felt hollow, like whatever fight I had in me had been worn down to nothing. The doctors finally decided they didn't have enough to keep me any longer, and they told me I'd be released soon. But even then, they acted like they were doing me some kind of favor, like I should be grateful they were letting me go. All I could think was, I just want out. I wanted out of that place, away from those people, and as far from the whole experience as possible. They'd turned what was already a rough time in my life into something way worse, all because I trusted the wrong person. And as they took me out of that room and walked me down those bleak hallways one last time, I made up my mind about one thing. I was done with all of them. When they finally let me out, it wasn't some big relief like I thought it would be. I felt numb, like whatever part of me that should have felt grateful for being free had been left back in that psych ward. They handed me my stuff, my wallet, my phone, like I was some kid who'd just been punished and was finally allowed to go back outside. But the second I took my things, I just wanted to leave. I didn't say a word to any of the staff, didn't even look back. I was done with them, done with that place. And of course, there they were, waiting for me outside, my parents and my girlfriend. They all had these expressions like they were relieved but also worried, and I could already see it. The questions, the "Are you okay?" and "Did it help?" expressions written all over their faces. But I wasn't about to play into that. I'd already been through enough. I didn't owe them anything. They all started talking at once the second they saw me. My mom was asking if I was okay. My dad tried to give me one of those weird side hugs, and my girlfriend was going on about how she'd missed me, how she was glad I was safe now. And honestly, I just couldn't take it. I felt this wave of anger bubble up inside me. All I could see was them making that choice for me, deciding what was best without even listening. They'd thrown me in there like I was some project they needed to fix, and now they wanted me to pretend like everything was fine. I didn't say a word to them. Not one. I just brushed past them, started walking away. They kept calling my name, asking where I was going, but I didn't stop. I had too much going on in my head to even care at that point. I just kept walking, barely noticing that it had started to rain. Somehow, that felt right, like the whole world was matching my mood. Heavy, gray, cold. I didn't even care about the rain soaking through my clothes. It was like, after everything, getting wet was the least of my problems. I must have walked a good 3 miles before I finally got back to my place. I hadn't stopped once, hadn't even thought about getting a ride or calling a cab. I just walked, letting the anger and hurt push me forward, one step after another, until I made it back. By the time I reached my door, I was drenched and exhausted, but something about that walk felt like it cleared my head a bit. Or maybe I just pushed everything so deep down that it was like I couldn't feel anything anymore. Either way, I didn't care. I was home, and that's all that mattered. When I stepped inside, my girlfriend had followed me. I hadn't even noticed she'd trailed me back, but there she was, dripping wet, looking at me like I was some kind of wounded animal. "We need to talk," she said, but I was done with talking. I'd already said everything that mattered back when I'd opened up to her, and look where that got me. I didn't want to hear her excuses, her justifications. I didn't want to hear any of it. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "We're done." Just like that. No explanation, no trying to soften the blow. I was exhausted, drained, and I didn't have the energy to play nice. She started to cry, saying she'd done what she thought was best, that she'd only wanted to help me. But her idea of help had been throwing me in a psych ward without even asking me what I wanted. How was that supposed to help? How was I supposed to feel safe with someone who could just decide what's best for me like that, without even a real conversation? I told her she had until the end of the week to pack her stuff and get out of my house. It felt harsh, but at that moment I didn't care. She kept trying to explain, kept going on about how much she cared about me, but I'd heard enough. I'd trusted her, thought she'd understand what I was going through, and instead, she'd turned my life upside down. Maybe some people would say I was being too hard on her, but if they'd been through what I had, they'd get it. You can't just throw someone into a place like that and expect things to go back to normal afterward. After she finally left, I sat there in my empty apartment staring at the walls. It was quiet, so damn quiet, and for the first time I really let myself feel the weight of everything. All the anger, the betrayal, it all hit me at once. I felt alone, but in a way it was better than pretending to be surrounded by people who didn't really care about what I wanted. They'd all acted like they were helping me, but none of them had actually asked me what I needed. They'd just made that choice for me, like I wasn't even there. My phone started buzzing with texts from my parents, probably worried that I'd cut off my girlfriend like that, but I didn't even look at them. I was done. I'd spent so much time trying to make everyone else happy, trying to play nice, that I'd forgotten what it meant to actually look out for myself. And now, after everything, I didn't have the energy to deal with their guilt trips and their explanations. Over the next few days, my parents kept trying to call, sending these long, guilt-laden texts about how my girlfriend was just trying to help, how I should forgive her, give her another chance. They couldn't get it. They'd never understand what it was like to be locked up in that place, treated like I was broken just because I was struggling. I knew they thought they were doing the right thing, but to me, it felt like they'd taken the one thing I had left, my right to decide what I wanted for myself, and thrown it away. By the end of the week, my girlfriend had packed up her things and left. I didn't say goodbye, didn't even look at her when she walked out the door. I was past that. She'd made her choice, and I'd made mine. It was like a part of me had died back there, in that psych ward, the part that believed people could understand without judgment, without trying to control me. I didn't need people who thought they knew better than I did what was best for me. I didn't realize how freeing it would feel to finally set that boundary, to tell the people who had hurt me that they didn't get to decide my life anymore. Yeah, it left me alone, but at least I was alone on my own terms. And as strange as it sounds, that gave me a kind of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. So now I'm sitting here, finally by myself, and I can't shake this question. Was I the A asterisk asterisk hole? I mean, I'm aware this whole situation's messed up. I'm not blind to the fact that they thought they were helping me. My girlfriend, my parents, they did what they did because they care. I get that, okay? But it still feels like they all just completely bulldozed over me, over what I wanted and needed, and now I'm left with nothing but this huge mess, and everyone around me telling me I'm wrong. It's like they thought they knew best, right? My girlfriend especially. I told her some really personal stuff I hadn't even really admitted to myself, and she took that as a green light to call the cops on me. I mean, who does that? She knew I wasn't planning to do anything drastic. I'd told her clear as day that I was struggling, but not actually in danger. And instead of actually listening to what I needed, she just went nuclear and dragged my family into it too, thinking that would somehow help. And my parents, man, they acted like they were so surprised, like they couldn't believe I was going through something like this. But I don't know. Part of me feels like they should have seen the signs. They know how rough work has been, how I've been drowning in bills, how every day has felt like a struggle lately. It's not like I'm hiding that part of my life. I mean, I live paycheck to paycheck. They knew that. They knew my job's been grinding me down. And when it finally got too heavy, and I reached out, they all acted like I was a problem that needed fixing, rather than just someone who needed a bit of understanding. So now I've cut everyone off. My girlfriend's gone, and I've blocked my parents' numbers. I made it clear that if they keep pushing, I'll go to the cops for trespassing. And yeah, I know that sounds extreme. I'm aware that to anyone else, I probably sound like a guy who's lost it. But if you'd been through what I went through, you'd get it. When the people you trust most decide that their version of help involves locking you up, it changes things. It changes how you see them and how you see yourself. And then there's the money side of things. Because, of course, insurance didn't cover my little trip to the psych ward. So now, on top of everything else, I'm saddled with a $10,000 bill for something I never wanted, never asked for, and definitely didn't need. Every time I think about it, it makes my blood boil. Like, I was already buried in bills, struggling to make ends meet, and now I have this giant debt sitting over my head because my girlfriend thought she was saving me. If I didn't laugh, I'd cry, honestly. People keep telling me I should reach out to the hospital, try to get the bill reduced. I get it. It's practical advice. But the whole idea of even dealing with them again just fills me with dread. I don't want to talk to anyone there, don't want to relive any of it. It's like that place left this scar, and every time I think about doing something about the bill, it just reopens. Maybe it sounds ridiculous, but it's the truth. Right now, I'd rather let that bill sit unpaid than have to explain myself to some billing department that probably doesn't care anyway. And then there's the question of what comes next. Because I'm sitting here with pretty much no support system left. I'm on my own, and that's fine. It's better than having people around who don't actually get it. But there's this nagging thought in the back of my head, this tiny, annoying voice saying, what if they were right? What if you were overreacting? And I hate that thought because it makes me doubt everything. It's like they've got this grip on me, even after I've pushed them all away. Like no matter what I do, I can't fully escape their version of help. A few days ago, I was scrolling through Reddit, trying to distract myself, and I came across a post from someone else who'd gone through something similar. They talked about feeling betrayed by the people closest to them, about how nobody actually understood what they needed. And I swear, it was like looking in a mirror. I wanted to reach through the screen and tell them I got it, that I knew exactly how they felt. It made me wonder if maybe I'm not as alone in this as I think. Maybe there are other people out there who've been through the same crap, who've had their trust shattered by the people they thought were supposed to care. But at the end of the day, that's all online. None of those people know me, and I don't know them. And as much as it helps to know that others get it, it doesn't really solve anything. I'm still here, still alone, still carrying this weight that nobody else seems to understand. And maybe that's my new reality. Maybe it's just me now, figuring things out one day at a time. I keep replaying that day in my head, wondering if I could have done something differently. Maybe if I'd explained things better, made it clearer that I just needed someone to listen, none of this would have happened. Or maybe it was inevitable. Maybe they would have done this no matter how I'd framed it because they couldn't see past their own fear. I don't know. And maybe I'll never know. All I know is that now, I'm the one left dealing with the fallout. So here I am, asking the internet, am I the a-hole for cutting them all off? Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like the only option I had left. I mean, if I can't trust the people who were supposed to have my back, then what's the point? I'm not going to keep them around just to make myself feel better. I need people in my life who actually listen, who see me as more than just a problem to fix. And if that means going it alone for now, so be it. Maybe one day I'll be ready to let them back in. Maybe, when enough time has passed, I'll be able to look back and see things differently. But right now, I'm still angry, still hurt, and still carrying that $10,000 reminder of their help. So was I the A*** hole for saying enough is enough? Because honestly, I don't think I am. But I'm open to hearing what you guys think. This story is titled, Made Fun of My Husband at a Neighborhood Party, until he stood up and said, It's over forever. Hey everyone, the channel's been slowing down a bit, and I spend so much time finding these stories for you. If you enjoy the content, please hit that subscribe button. It means the world, and helps keep this journey going strong. Let's grow together. Now let's start the video. OP starts by saying, Hey Reddit, I'm using a throwaway because I don't want this connected to my main account. My name's Lisa, I'm 24, and my husband Jack is 26. We've been married for 3 years, but we've known each other since college. Honestly, I never thought I'd be in this situation. I screwed up, and now I'm paying for it. But I need to write this down because my head's spinning. Jack and I have always been different. He's the quiet, introverted type who's happy with a good book or a movie at home. I'm the total opposite. I love going out, hosting parties, and being surrounded by people. When we first got together, I thought it was perfect. He balanced me out, you know. He let me be the social butterfly while he stayed more in the background. But looking back, I didn't realize how much that dynamic was wearing him down. Jack's always been, I don't know the right word, accommodating, selfless, pushover. Hate saying that, but it's the truth. He always puts others before himself, especially me. Like, he'd get up at 6 a.m. just to bring me my favorite coffee because he knew I liked it fresh. If I was in a bad mood, he'd cancel his plans to stay home with me. He'd plan romantic dinners, surprise me with little gifts, and always made me feel like I was the most important person in the world. And me? I took it all for granted. I got used to it and stopped appreciating the things he did for me. I think it's because he never complained. Even when I'd slack off or get annoyed with him, he'd just smile and say, I love you, Lisa. It's like I convinced myself that he'd never leave, no matter how I acted. He loved me too much, right? I figured he'd just put up with it forever. Things really started to shift when I decided I wanted to be a stay-at-home wife. Yeah, we don't have kids or anything. I just didn't want to work anymore. Jack was making decent money, and I figured, why not? He didn't argue. He just said, if that makes you happy, we'll figure it out. Looking back, I can see how unfair that was. We were both young, just getting started in life, and I put all the financial pressure on him without even asking how he felt about it. At first, I kept the house clean and made dinner most nights, but that didn't last long. I got lazy. Jack would come home from work to a messy house, no dinner, and me sitting on the couch scrolling through my phone. He never complained. He'd just roll up his sleeves and start cleaning or cooking. He'd say he was tired, but he'd do it anyway because he wanted me to relax. And instead of feeling grateful, I started to resent him. It sounds so messed up when I say it now, but I wanted him to push back. I wanted him to tell me no or stand up for himself. Instead, he just kept bending over backward for me, and I started seeing him as weak. I started to think maybe I needed someone more assertive, someone who could handle me, whatever that means. Around this time, I started going out more with friends. Jack would encourage me to have fun, even handing me extra money to cover drinks or whatever. He'd tell me to call him if I needed a ride, but he never went out with me. That wasn't his thing, and I was fine with that, or at least I thought I was. The more time I spent with my friends, the more I started to see Jack as boring. My friends didn't help either. They'd make little comments about how I deserved someone more exciting, someone who could keep up with me. The worst part? I started to believe them. One Friday night, I went out with my friend Tina for what was supposed to be a simple girls' dinner. It turned into bar hopping and dancing until 2 a.m. Jack had given me some extra cash, saying, "Have fun, babe. You deserve it." I laughed it off at the time, but now it feels so pathetic. Anyway, that night I made fun of Jack for the first time in front of my friends. We were tipsy, and I joked about how he did everything for me, how he let me be a stay-at-home wife, even though we didn't have kids. Tina and the others ate it up, laughing and calling him a pushover. In that moment, I felt powerful, important, I don't know, but it felt good to have their attention, even if it was at Jack's expense. The next morning, Jack made me breakfast like he always did after my nights out. He asked how my night was, and I gave him a vague, one-word answer. I could tell he wanted to ask more, but he didn't. He just said, "I'm glad you had fun," and kissed my forehead. I should have felt guilty. I did, for about 5 minutes. But then I brushed it off. Jack was fine, right? He didn't say anything, so it must not have bothered him. That's how I justified it to myself. Over the next few weeks, I went out more often. Tina and the others became my go-to group, and Jack started to feel more like a background character in my life. He'd still try to connect with me, asking about my day, planning date nights, but I'd always make an excuse or blow him off. Our conversations got shorter, and I could feel the distance growing between us. He looked tired all the time, but I ignored it. I figured he'd get over it, just like he always did. One night, I had a group of friends over for a movie night. Jack, being the saint he is, cooked us all dinner and then went to the bedroom to give us space. We were drinking wine, and the conversation turned to relationships. Tina joked about how her boyfriend could learn a thing or two from Jack. That turned into more jokes about how perfect Jack was and how I had him trained. Fueled by the wine and the attention, I joined in. I made fun of his quirks, how he'd do anything I asked without hesitation, and even joked that I could probably tell him to jump off a cliff, and he'd ask how high. My friends were dying laughing, and I felt like the star of the show. I didn't think twice about it until the next morning. Jack didn't say anything about it, but the way he looked at me that morning broke my heart. He didn't seem angry, just defeated. He kissed me goodbye like always, but I could see the hurt in his eyes. For the first time, I felt a pang of guilt I couldn't shake, but instead of apologizing or even acknowledging it, I buried it. I convinced myself it wasn't a big deal. Jack would forgive me like always, right? Except this time, I think I pushed him too far. Things really started falling apart when I reconnected with some old college friends who had recently moved back to our area. I hadn't seen these people in years, and catching up with them felt like a breath of fresh air. They were loud, fun, and carefree, the kind of people who didn't seem tied down by boring routines. At the time, I thought I was missing out on something by staying home so much with Jack. Looking back, I see how stupid that was. The first time I went out with them, Jack was supportive like always. He handed me extra cash, told me to have fun, and even offered to pick me up if I needed a ride. I thought it was sweet, but at the same time, it made me roll my eyes. Like, why couldn't he come out and have fun with me? He always stayed home, doing his thing. I used to think it was just who he was, but being around my friends made me start comparing him to other guys who were more outgoing or exciting. It wasn't fair, but it's where my head was at. That first night out was the tipping point. We had a couple of drinks, and the conversation turned to relationships. Someone made a joke about their partner being lazy, and Tina, my closest friend in the group, turned to me and said, "Lisa, your guy's basically a housewife. Must be nice having someone who does everything for you." I should have defended Jack, but instead I laughed. I told them about how he always cooked, cleaned, and even encouraged me to stay home while he worked. Tina and the others were cracking up, saying I had Jack wrapped around my finger. One of them said, "Girl, you're living the dream. Why settle when you could have more?" I laughed along, but deep down, it planted a seed of doubt. When I got home that night, Jack had stayed up waiting for me. He asked how my night was, and I brushed him off with a quick, "It was fine." He didn't press, just smiled and said, "I'm glad you had fun." I could tell he wanted to connect, but I was too caught up in the excitement of my new social life to care. Instead of feeling grateful, I felt annoyed. Why couldn't he be more like the guys I saw at the bar? Confident, funny, and loud? Over the next few weeks, I started going out more. Every time, Jack would tell me to have fun and remind me to be safe. He'd even offer to drive me if I needed it. And every time, I'd mock him to my friends. At first, it was little jokes, like how he'd text me to make sure I was okay, or how he'd always remind me to drink water. But then it got meaner. I'd joke about how he'd let me stay home and do nothing, or how he'd never stand up to me. My friends would laugh, telling me I deserved better, and I'd soak it all up. At home, things were changing too. Jack didn't complain, but he started pulling back. He'd go straight to bed after work, saying he was tired, and we barely talked anymore. He still cooked dinner and cleaned up after me, but there was this distance between us. I should have seen it as a red flag, but instead, I got frustrated. I convinced myself that he was being passive-aggressive, that he was sulking because I was finally living my life. One night, I invited Tina and some other friends over for a movie night. Jack, being the guy he is, made dinner for everyone and even set up the living room with snacks and blankets. Once we were settled, he quietly disappeared into the bedroom to give us space. For a while, we just watched movies and had a good time. But after a couple of glasses of wine, the conversation shifted to relationships again. Tina started talking about her boyfriend, saying how she wished he'd put in half the effort Jack did. Then someone else said, "Lisa's got it made. Jack's like the perfect husband, right?" And instead of agreeing or saying something nice, I started making fun of him. I joked about how he was too perfect, how he'd do anything I asked without question. I even said, if I told Jack to jump off a cliff, he'd probably ask how high. Everyone was laughing, and for a moment, I felt on top of the world. I didn't realize Jack could hear us until the next morning. When I woke up, he was already dressed for work. He didn't say anything about the night before, but there was this look in his eyes, like he was holding back tears. He kissed my forehead like always, told me he loved me, and left. I should have apologized right then and there, but instead, I buried the guilt. I told myself it didn't matter. Jack loved me, and he'd forgive me like he always did. But things didn't go back to normal. Jack started working longer hours, and when he was home, he barely spoke to me. He still did everything he always did. Cooked, cleaned, took care of things around the house. But there was this quiet tension. It's like he was still trying, but his heart wasn't in it anymore. I ignored it, thinking it was just a phase. I didn't realize how much damage I'd already done. Around this time, I started noticing a shift in how our friends treated Jack. At first, it was subtle, little jokes here and there about how he was whipped or too accommodating. But over time, they stopped taking him seriously. They'd roll their eyes when he spoke or interrupt him in conversations. And instead of defending him, I joined in. I laughed when they made jokes about him, even added my own comments. I thought Jack didn't notice, but he did. I could see it in the way he'd smile at their jokes, even though his eyes told a different story. He'd laugh along, saying things like, "As long as Lisa's happy, I'm happy." But there was this flicker of pain he couldn't hide. I should have stopped it. I should have told our friends to show him some respect, but I didn't. The worst part is, Jack's few remaining friends started pulling away too. They'd tell him he deserved better, that he needed to stand up for himself, but he'd always defend me. "Lisa's just going through a phase," he'd say. "She doesn't mean it." I think that was the beginning of the end for us. The more Jack defended me, the weaker I thought he looked. And the weaker he looked, the less respect I had for him. It became this toxic cycle, me pulling away, him trying harder, and both of us pretending everything was fine. I started spending more time with Tina and her group. They encouraged my behavior, telling me I could do better than Jack, that I was settling, and I believed them. Jack, on the other hand, kept shrinking into himself. He focused more on work, avoided social events, and gave me even more space. I thought it was what I wanted, but instead, it made me resent him even more. Looking back, I can see how unfair I was to Jack. He was doing everything he could to hold us together, and I was too selfish to see it. I let my insecurities and need for validation ruin the one good thing I had. But at the time, I didn't care. I thought Jack would always be there, no matter what. I thought he loved me too much to ever leave. I was wrong. The breaking point came on what should have been just another neighborhood barbecue. Jack and I had been invited to our neighbor's house for one of their regular get-togethers. These parties were common in our tight-knit community, and while Jack wasn't the most social guy, he always made an effort. He'd usually handle the grill, make sure everyone had what they needed, and stay on the sidelines while I mingled with our friends. This time wasn't any different. At least, not at first. It was a sunny day, and everyone seemed in good spirits. Jack was helping at the grill, making burgers and hot dogs while chatting with a few of the guys. I barely noticed him. I was too busy hanging out with Tina and our group, sipping on drinks and catching up. The party was lively, and as always, the conversation drifted to relationships. One of the women in the group started complaining about her husband not helping around the house, and someone else chimed in about how their partner never planned dates or paid attention to them. Then, as if on cue, all eyes turned to me. "Lisa, you're so lucky," Tina said with a laugh. "Jack's basically the perfect husband, right? He does everything for you." I should have smiled and agreed. I should have said something kind about him, but instead I felt the need to one-up the conversation. "Oh, trust me," I said, laughing. "Jack's great, but sometimes it's like he's too perfect, you know? Like, he never says no to me. It's almost annoying." The group laughed, and Tina pushed me further. "Seriously, what's it like to have a guy who just does whatever you want? You must feel like a queen." I leaned into it. "I mean, yeah, I guess. He's so accommodating, it's kind of funny. I could probably tell him to jump off a cliff, and he'd just ask how high." The table erupted in laughter, and I felt that familiar rush of attention. It was like a high, being the center of the joke, the one everyone was laughing with. But then I noticed the silence. I looked up, and there was Jack, standing just a few feet away. His face was pale, his jaw tight, and his eyes, I can't even describe the look in his eyes. It wasn't anger. It was something worse, like he'd just been gutted. "Lisa," he said, his voice steady but cold. "Can we talk? Now." The laughter at the table stopped immediately, and everyone turned to look at us. I froze, not sure what to say. Sure," I muttered, setting down my drink and standing up. I followed him to a quieter corner of the yard, aware of the stairs behind us. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but my heart was racing. Jack didn't look like himself. He looked done. He took a deep breath and said, "I can't do this anymore." At first, I thought he was joking. "Do what?" I asked, forcing a nervous laugh, but he didn't smile. He didn't even flinch. "I can't keep pretending everything's okay," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I've tried, Lisa. I've tried so hard to make this work, but I can't keep being the punchline of your jokes. I can't keep being disrespected by you, by your friends, by everyone." My stomach dropped. "Jack, what are you talking about? It was just a joke. You're overreacting." He shook his head. "It's not just this one thing, Lisa. It's everything. The way you treat me. The way your friends treat me because of the way you talk about me. I've been trying to hold on because I love you, but I can't do this anymore. I deserve better than this." I stared at him, stunned. Jack had never talked to me like this before. He was always calm, always forgiving. It felt like he had suddenly transformed into a completely different person, someone I didn't recognize. "You're just mad," I said, trying to brush it off. "Let's go home and talk about this later." "No," he said firmly. "We're not going home together. I'm done, Lisa. When you get home, your things will be on the porch. I want you out." I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. "Jack, stop! You don't mean that." He met my eyes, and for the first time, I realized he wasn't bluffing. "Yes, I do," he said. "I've made up my mind." And with that, he walked away. I stood there, frozen, as he returned to the grill like nothing had happened. The party continued around me, but I could feel everyone's eyes on me. They didn't know exactly what had been said, but it was obvious something had just gone very, very wrong. I wanted to cry, to scream, to make him take it back, but I couldn't move. Eventually, I grabbed my purse and left the party, walking home in a daze. When I got there, I found Jack already packing my things into boxes. I tried to talk to him, to apologize, to explain, but he wouldn't even look at me. "Please, Jack," I begged, tears streaming down my face. "I'm sorry. I'll fix this. Just give me another chance." He didn't stop packing. "It's too late, Lisa," he said quietly. "I've been giving you chances for years, and you've thrown every one of them away. I'm done." When he finished packing, he carried the boxes to the porch and set them down. Then he turned to me and said, "You need to leave. If you don't, I'll call the police." I stared at him, hoping he'd change his mind, but his expression didn't budge. I had no choice but to leave. As I walked away, carrying what I could, I felt completely humiliated. I could see our neighbors peeking out of their windows, watching the drama unfold. Even Tina, who had been my closest friend, didn't say a word to me. I ended up at a park down the street sitting on a bench and crying until my dad came to pick me up. I told him what had happened, though I left out the part about how badly I'd treated Jack. He was disappointed, but he took me back to my parents' house. And now I'm here, trying to figure out what the hell to do next. Jack won't answer my calls or texts. I've reached out to Tina and the others, but no one's responded. I feel like I've lost everything. My husband, my home, even my friends. And the worst part is, I know I did this to myself. After Jack kicked me out, I spent the first couple of days in shock. I mean, I knew I had messed up, but I didn't think it would ever come to this. Jack had always been so patient, so forgiving. I thought no matter what I did, he'd always stick around. That was my first mistake, assuming his love had no limits. When I got to my parents' house, they didn't say much at first. My dad could tell something serious had happened, but I only gave him a half-baked explanation like, Jack's upset and we're taking a break. I didn't want to admit the full story, that I had publicly humiliated my husband over and over until he finally snapped. My mom didn't push for details, but I could tell by the way she looked at me that she wasn't buying my version of things. The silence from Jack was unbearable. I called him at least a dozen times, left voicemail after voicemail, and sent text after text. He didn't respond to any of it. The man who used to text me good morning every single day and send cute little updates throughout his workday was now ignoring me completely. That hurt more than anything, because I realized it wasn't just anger, it was indifference. He was done, and nothing I said was going to change that. Even worse, the people I considered my friends, the ones who had encouraged me to act this way, went radio silent too. Not a single text or call from Tina or anyone else in our group. It hit me like a brick. These people were never really my friends. They loved the drama, the gossip, and the jokes when they were at Jack's expense. But now that things had blown up, they didn't want anything to do with me. A couple of days after the neighborhood party, I decided to go back to our house. I told myself I just wanted to grab a few things I might have forgotten, but deep down, I was hoping to see Jack. I thought maybe if I showed up in person, he'd at least let me explain. But when I got there, he wasn't home. The locks had already been changed, and there was a small box on the porch with a note taped to it. The note read, "Lisa, this is the last of your stuff. Please don't come back here again. I've already started the process of filing for divorce. I'll send you the papers soon. Jack." I stood there, holding that note, and felt my heart shatter all over again. Divorce? He was serious? Knew things were bad, but I thought we'd at least try to work through it. I sat on the steps for what felt like forever, just staring at the box. It was like my entire life had been packed into one small container, and that's all I had left. When I got back to my parents' house, my mom finally cornered me. "Lisa," she said, "this break doesn't sound like a break. What really happened?" I broke down and told her everything. The jokes, the comments, the way I treated Jack in front of my friends. I even admitted how I'd been mocking him for months. My mom listened, but when I finished, she didn't try to sugarcoat it. "Lisa, I'm not going to lie to you. What you did was awful. Jack has every right to be upset." Hearing that from her stung, but I knew she was right. I started crying again, saying I didn't know why I acted the way I did, why I pushed him so far. My mom sighed and said, "Maybe you didn't think he'd ever leave. But Lisa, love isn't infinite. Even the kindest people have their breaking points." My dad, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke up. "You need to stop making excuses and figure out how to move forward. You can't change the past, but you can decide who you want to be from here on out." It wasn't the comforting pep talk I wanted, but it was what I needed to hear. The days dragged on, and my calls to Jack went unanswered. I started checking social media, desperate to get some glimpse into his life. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Jack looked happy. A neighbor had posted photos from the party, and there he was, smiling and laughing with people after I'd left. I hadn't seen that kind of smile from him in years. It was like a punch to the gut. While I was crying at my parents' house, Jack was moving on. I also started hearing whispers from people in the neighborhood. Apparently, word had spread about the scene at the barbecue, and everyone knew why Jack didn't expect. "You know," she said, "a lot of your friends have been trying to get close to Jack now that you're out of the picture. It's disgusting, honestly." Hearing that made my blood boil. These so-called friends, the ones who had encouraged me to treat Jack like dirt, were now going after him? I felt betrayed all over again. But at the same time, it just confirmed what I already knew. They were never really my friends. They were just users. The kind of people who thrive on drama and don't care who they hurt in the process. That night, I blocked Tina and everyone else from my social media. I didn't want to see or hear anything about them ever again. If Jack was smart, he'd keep his distance too. At this point, I realized I had hit rock bottom. I didn't have my husband, my home, or my friends. All I had was the mess I had made, and I had to figure out how to clean it up. For the first time in years, I thought about what Jack must have felt all those nights I ignored him, mocked him, or dismissed his efforts. It was a heavy realization, and it crushed me. I didn't know how to fix things with Jack, or even if I could, but I knew one thing for sure. I had to fix myself first. After the fallout from the neighborhood party and Jack's final decision to leave, I had no choice but to confront my reality. My husband was gone. My so-called friends had vanished, and I was back living with my parents like I was 18 again. It felt like I'd lost everything I had spent years building. But the hardest part wasn't the loss. It was the realization that I had caused it all. Jack's silence was deafening. Days turned into weeks, and he still wouldn't answer my calls or texts. I tried writing him letters, apologizing, and explaining how I wanted to change, but I couldn't even bring myself to send them. What could I say that he hadn't already heard before? Every time I picked up my phone, I imagined him seeing my name on the screen and feeling nothing but disgust. One day, the divorce papers showed up at my parents' house. My hands shook as I opened the envelope. Jack had written a simple note. "I've included everything you'll need. Please don't contact me again unless it's through a lawyer." I sat there staring at the papers, feeling the finality of it hit me. Jack wasn't angry anymore. He wasn't hurt. He was done. And there was nothing I could do to change that. I signed the papers a few days later, but it felt like I was signing away more than just our marriage. I was signing away the part of my life where I knew unconditional love, stability, and forgiveness. Jack had always been my safety net, and now I had to stand on my own for the first time in years. My parents, while supportive, didn't coddle me. My dad kept pushing me to find a job, saying, "You can't sit here forever, Lisa. You've got to start over." But the idea of starting over was terrifying. I hadn't worked in years, and the thought of going back into the job market felt impossible. I had no confidence, no skills to brag about, and no idea where to start. Still, I knew I couldn't keep living in limbo. I started applying for jobs. Anything and everything. Retail, office work, even some restaurant gigs. I got a few interviews, but nothing panned out at first. It was humiliating, sitting across from hiring managers who could tell I'd been out of the workforce for too long. Every rejection felt like another reminder of how far I'd fallen. Eventually, my dad pulled some strings and got me a part-time job at a local grocery store. It wasn't glamorous, and I hated every second of it, but I needed the money. Standing at the register for hours, scanning groceries, and making small talk with customers gave me a lot of time to think about how I ended up here. I'd go home exhausted, but at least I was doing something. It wasn't much, but it was a start. One day, a customer recognized me. It was one of our old neighbors, someone who had been at the infamous barbecue. She gave me a sympathetic smile and said, "Lisa, I heard about you and Jack. I hope you're doing okay." I wanted to crawl under the counter, but I forced a smile and said, "I'm getting by. Thanks." Then she said something that stopped me cold. "Jack seems to be doing really well. I ran into him last week, and he looked happier than I've ever seen him. Happier." That word stayed with me for days. Jack was happier without me. While I was standing at a cash register trying to piece my life back together, he was out there thriving. It wasn't jealousy, it was shame. I had spent so much time tearing him down, and now that he was free from me, he was finally able to be the person he deserved to be. The neighbor mentioned something else too. "You know, a lot of the women in the neighborhood are trying to get close to him now. It's kind of gross, honestly." That part didn't surprise me. Tina and the others had always acted like vultures, circling around anything they thought they could take, but hearing it out loud still made my stomach turn. These were the same women who had laughed with me, mocked Jack with me, and encouraged me to treat him like dirt. Now they were chasing after him. I wanted to reach out to Jack and warn him, tell him not to fall for their fake charm, but I knew it wasn't my place anymore. Jack wasn't my husband. He wasn't even my friend. He was someone I had lost the right to care for. After weeks of spiraling, my mom suggested therapy. At first, I resisted. "What's the point?" I said. "I know what I did wrong. Talking about it isn't going to change anything." But my mom wouldn't let it go. "Lisa, you've been stuck in your own head for too long. You need someone to help you sort through this." I finally caved and started seeing a therapist. Those sessions were brutal. Talking about the way I had treated Jack forced me to confront parts of myself I didn't want to acknowledge. I realized that a lot of my behavior came from insecurity. I had this need to be the center of attention, to feel like I was in control, and I took it out on the one person who loved me unconditionally. The therapist helped me see that I wasn't just grieving the loss of Jack. I was grieving the person I thought I was. For years, I had convinced myself that I was this confident, fun, independent woman. But the truth was, I had leaned on Jack for everything. Without him, I felt like nothing. Therapy didn't fix everything overnight, but it gave me a starting point. I began setting small goals for myself, saving money from my grocery store job, cooking meals for my parents as a way to show my gratitude, and even signing up for a few online courses to brush up on my skills. It wasn't much, but it was progress. I stopped trying to contact Jack. Every time I picked up my phone, I reminded myself that I needed to respect his boundaries. He deserved peace, and chasing after him wouldn't do either of us any good. Instead, I focused on rebuilding my life, one tiny step at a time. One evening, while scrolling through social media, I saw a post from that same neighbor who had come through my checkout line. She had posted a photo of Jack at a charity event, smiling and surrounded by people. He looked good, healthy, confident, and at ease. It hurt to see him so happy without me, but it also gave me a strange sense of closure. Jack was going to be okay, and maybe someday I would be too. It's been months now since the divorce was finalized. I'm still living with my parents, but I've started saving up to get my own place. My job isn't glamorous, but it's helping me rebuild. Therapy has been a lifeline, helping me understand my mistakes and teaching me how to be better. I know I'll never get Jack back, and I've made peace with that. He deserves happiness, and I wasn't the partner he needed, but I'm learning to forgive myself too. I can't undo the past, but I can make sure I never repeat those mistakes again. To anyone reading this, don't take the people you love for granted. Don't assume their patience is infinite. Love is a two-way street, and if you don't treat it with respect, you'll lose it. Trust me, I learned that the hard way.
What the hell is going on here? I snarled, slamming the bank statements down on the kitchen counter. The numbers stared back accusingly, thousands of dollars drained from my personal account over the past few months. Clay glanced up from his laptop, his chiseled jaw tightening. What are you ranting about now, Arya? I could hear the dismissive tone laced with irritation. Don't play dumb with me. Nearly 10 grand has disappeared from my savings account, and I want to know where it went. He scoffed, shaking his head as if I was overreacting. You're being ridiculous. It's our money. Doesn't matter whose account it's in. My blood boiled at his arrogant indifference. We'd had this circular argument too many times. That's my personal savings I've built up over years, Clay. My money from marketing clients and investments. You can't just drain it whenever you want. I had some extra expenses to cover for the team, that's all. Clay shrugged nonchalantly before returning his gaze to the laptop screen. No need to make a federal case out of it. I opened my mouth but quickly clamped it shut. Reasoning with him was futile when he got this cavalier. Something dark twisted in the pit of my stomach, an instinct I could no longer ignore. Look at me. My voice was quieter but laced with steel. Clay's eyes flicked up, finally registering my simmering anger. What? I'm not buying your excuses anymore, not this time. I leaned forward, gripping the counter's edge until my knuckles turned white. You're lying to me about something, and I'm going to find out what it is. A humorless laugh escaped his lips as he rose from his chair. You're being paranoid, babe. The company's doing great, and your dad's business is more successful than ever. There was that smug, placating tone again, the one designed to make me doubt myself and back down. Not this time. In a few strides I was nose to nose with Clay, no kitchen counter between us. Don't you dare bring my family into this. If you've done anything to jeopardize their company. His features hardened, and he grabbed my wrist, his grip just shy of bruising. You listen to me. I've given you a life most women only dream about, a nice home, vacations, financial security. Stop acting like an ungrateful, hysterical shrew and leave the money talk to me. My heart was pounding, but not from fear. That arrogant sneer and his dismissive words ignited something within me, a simmering rage I'd suppressed for too long. In that moment, the carefully constructed facade of our marriage began to splinter. His fingers dug painfully into my skin as he leaned closer. This jealousy and distrust doesn't look good on you, Arya. Now, why don't you go take a hot bath and let me worry about the finances like a good little wife? That was the final condescending blow I could take. With a strength born of pure fury, I wrenched my arm free from his grasp. You narcissistic bastard. Our marriage is one big financial lie. Well, I'm done being one of your blind little lambs. Clay's eyes widened slightly at my vehemence, but I didn't stick around to hear his pitiful excuses and insults. I spun on my heel and stormed out, the slam of the front door being the final punctuation on our fractured charade. The truth was out there somewhere, and nothing was going to stop me from finding it and bringing Clay's deceit into the scorching light. The next morning, I strode into Westbrook Marketing, feeling clear-headed for the first time in months. Clay had already left for the office, which was probably for the best. I needed time to think through my next moves without his toxic presence clouding my judgment. "Everything okay?" Dean, one of the top data analysts, peered at me with a concerned frown as I settled at my desk. I forced a tight smile, keenly aware that the entire office had likely overheard my explosive fight with Clay yesterday. "Just a minor disagreement with my husband, but I'm fine, really." Dean didn't seem convinced, but gave a hesitant nod before returning to his work. I exhaled slowly, grateful that he didn't press further. I could sort through my marital problems on my own, starting by getting to the bottom of Clay's shady financial dealings. By lunchtime, I'd already dug up bank statements for the past year and created a meticulously detailed spreadsheet tracking where every cent of my savings and earnings had gone. The numbers told a disturbing story of frequent large withdrawals that Clay hadn't accounted for. "He really is hemorrhaging your finances." A familiar voice made me jump. Lena stood over my shoulder, eyes narrowed at the incriminating spreadsheet. "Sorry, I didn't mean to startle you. Your door was open." I quickly waved her inside, relief flooding me that my oldest friend was here. "Lena, I'm so glad you stopped by. Clay's been up to something underhanded for a while now, and I need your help nailing down what it is." She settled into the chair across from me, jaw set in a determined line. "You know I've got your back, no matter what. Just tell me everything." Over the next hour, I recounted every sketchy comment and strange financial discrepancy involving Clay, from the missing funds to his illusions about covering expenses for his precious sales team. By the end, Lena's eyes had hardened to chips of green ice. "That weaselly son of a bitch," she hissed, surprising me with her uncharacteristic venom. "Don't worry, Arya, we'll make him pay for this deception, both financially and emotionally." I couldn't help the rush of gratitude and affection for my straight-shooting friend. "Thank you, Lena. You have no idea how much it means to have you in my corner." Lena leaned forward, perfectly arched brows furrowed in thought. "Okay, first thing we need to do is documentation. I'll draft a formal letter from my firm putting Clay on notice that his shady dealings won't be tolerated. We'll also need to look into your options for legal protection, just in case that slimeball tries anything underhanded." I nodded, finally feeling like I was taking back control. "There's more. I think some of my dad's business funds may have also been compromised." Lena's eyes went wide with outrage. "Clay stole from Max, too? Oh, that tears it. I'll make sure his expensive suits get taken away and he rots in prison." My lips twitched despite the circumstances. Only Lena could interweave snark and dogged loyalty so seamlessly. "Slow down there, Bulldog. We need to gather hard proof first before looping in my dad." I placed a calming hand on her arm. "For now, let's focus on legally protecting me and making sure Clay faces consequences for his thievery." Lena's severe expression softened slightly, and she gave a brisk nod. "You're right. We do this methodically and by the book. God help that bastard once we put the screws to him." A sense of grim purpose settled over me. My marriage may have crumbled, but I refused to be another helpless victim of Clay's manipulation. With Lena's brilliant legal mind and my own determination, the deceitful facade was about to come crashing down. Justice and vengeance were on the horizon, and nothing would stop me from achieving both. Over the next few days, Lena and I compiled an airtight dossier documenting every suspicious transaction and questionable money trail involving Clay. My whole body thrummed with vindicated fury each time another piece of evidence materialized. I was bent over my laptop Friday evening, scouring Clay's company expenses yet again, when my cell phone buzzed with an incoming call from my dad. A knot formed in my stomach. I hadn't been ready to loop him in on this chaos just yet. "Hey, Dad, what's up?" I tried to keep my tone light. "Arya, we need to talk." Max's gruff voice was laced with an uncharacteristic tension. "It's about your husband and the company finances." I felt the blood drain from my face as realization crashed over me. Lena and I had been so focused on Clay's personal deception that we missed how deeply his thievery may have penetrated into my father's business world. "I'm on my way over now," I said, already grabbing my purse and car keys. When I arrived at Max's house 20 minutes later, he was waiting in the den, a grim countenance etched on his chiseled features. This couldn't be good. His piercing gaze met mine as I entered. "You weren't going to tell me about that snake, Clayton, misappropriating funds from my marketing software firm?" I opened my mouth, but the words stuck in my throat. How did he find out? As if sensing my question, Max jerked his chin towards the love seat. "Your friend Dean came to see me, showed me documents indicating your husband's been skimming money from client accounts and grossly overbilling." There was Dean, looking appropriately abashed at having spilled the beans. But his eyes were resolute. He clearly saw this as the moral thing to do. "I'm so sorry, Arya," he said sincerely. "I couldn't just stand by while Clay kept robbing your family like that. Not after all Max has done for the company and his employees." A surge of affection for my ethical colleague washed over me. "No, Dean, you did the right thing. I was trying to gather proof before bringing this to Dad's attention." Max let out a gruff noise of assent. "Good thinking. We'll need to blow that rat scheme out into the open with irrefutable evidence." For the next hour, Dean outlined the improper billing and accounting discrepancies, while I shared the documentation Lena and I had compiled regarding the personal finances. By the end, a pall of grim determination had settled over the three of us. "So," I cleared my throat, keeping my voice as steady as possible, "what's our next move to take down Clay?" The muscle in Max's taut jaw twitched almost imperceptibly. "We keep gathering proof, but don't make a move against him until we've got the full scope of his thievery. Lena's helping with this, I assume?" I nodded. "She's already got me separated financially and is working on legal protection just in case Clay retaliates." The barest hint of a smile played across Dean's lips. "Smart woman, that Lena." Max slapped his hand down on the desk with a dull thud. "Good. Clayton Barrett has messed with the wrong family this time. We'll hit him with everything we've got until that con man is destitute and behind bars where he belongs." The sheer venom in my normally stoic father's voice made me flinch. But I couldn't fault his fury. Clay had well and truly betrayed us all. "I want to take the lead on this," I stated in a low voice. "Clay's my husband, and his deception cuts the deepest with me." My dad's eyes bored into mine for a long moment before giving a solemn nod of agreement. "Damn right, kiddo. We're all behind you 100% to take that scumbag down." Dean put a reassuring hand on my shoulder and gave it a supportive squeeze. United with the most important men in my life, a wave of fierce resolve washed over me. I would make Clay pay for every last cent he'd stolen. More importantly, I'd shatter the twisted facade he'd constructed and regain my sense of self, my independence, once and for all. The games were over. The reckoning had officially begun. Over the next few weeks, a cold determination took root within me, hardening my resolve with each new, unraveled deception. Thanks to Dean's diligent record-keeping and Lena's legal prowess, the full, sickening scope of Clay's financial crimes came into focus. Not only had he embezzled funds from my personal accounts, but he'd expertly skimmed money from client billings at my father's company through a complex system of shell corporations and insider deals with shady third-party vendors. His greed and arrogance knew no bounds. "Your bastard husband has been bleeding us dry for years," Dad growled, poring over the documentation one evening. The muscle in his weathered jaw twitched with barely restrained fury. "We've got him nailed to the wall on multiple counts of fraud, tax evasion, you name it." Lena's lips curved into a predatory smile, green eyes glinting with vengeful triumph. "That double-crossing snake is going down hard." While settling the legal noose around Clay's neck, Lena and Dean were also advising me on establishing financial independence, securing credit and assets solely in my name, squirreling away cash reserves in preparation for an inevitable divorce battle. I'd be damned if I let Clayton manipulate me into domestic violence victim territory, living off grudging alimony scraps. With every dossier review and money trail unraveled, my own sense of self-determination deepened. The insidious fog of marital gaslighting that Clay had woven now dissipated in the cold, harsh light of his deceptions. He'd inflicted the cruelest form of betrayal by robbing from my family while eroding my sense of self-worth. But like the mythological phoenix, I was rising from the ashes of my codependent naivete. "Arya, we've got everything lined up to crush that weasel," Lena said, jaw set in a grim line. "The million-dollar question is, do you want to confront Clayton before or after we lower the legal boom?" I stared her down, body humming with a buzzing undercurrent of wrath. While part of me wanted the smug shock value of blindsiding Clay after he'd been indicted on multiple felonies, I knew that wasn't my style. More importantly, I wanted to look into his cold, vapid eyes when I ripped the mask off his deceitful facade, to leave no doubt that I outwitted and overpowered him at every turn. And so it was that I found myself gripping the damning evidence file with white knuckles as I strode into Clay's hotel suite 3 nights later. He'd been traveling on yet another regional manager trip, code for some extended tryst with a mistress bankrolled by his ill-gotten gains. "Working a bit late tonight, aren't we?" His lips split into that annoyingly cocky grin I'd once found charming as I stepped into the dimly lit living area. He drained the last sip of scotch from his tumbler. "To what do I owe the pleasure of this surprise visit, Mrs. Barrett?" The overwhelming stench of Scheiper perfume, his latest tawdry conquest no doubt, wafted from the bedroom suite. My grip tightened further on the file until the edges crinkled. "Cut the smarmy bullshit, Clay. You and I both know surprise visits have never been your forte." His lopsided smirk faltered ever so slightly. "What's that supposed to mean?" Summoning every last ounce of icy calm I possessed, I strode forward and slammed the thick evidence file onto the marble-topped cocktail table, scattering the contents in a frenzied spiral of incriminating documents and bank statements. "It means I know everything, you degenerate sack of shit." The words hissed through my gritted teeth. "Every illicit transfer, every shady account, every penny you stole from me and my family's company while parading around like some high-rolling corporate raider." Clay's face turned to stone as the gravity of the situation came crashing down around him. He opened his mouth, but I cut him off with a raised hand. "Don't bother lying or feigning innocence. That ship sailed the moment you helped yourself to my life savings to fund your tawdry affairs and inflated expense accounts." I allowed myself a grim half-smile at the utterly bewildered look on his face. "What, you thought I'd never catch on? That I'd stay your meek, obedient little wife forever while you conned me blind?" Clay's jaw clenched, lips pressed into a thin line. "You've got it all wrong, Arya. I can explain every last cent." With a rough jerk of his arm, he swiped the damning papers off the cocktail table in an angry clatter. "The company's been going through some transitional headaches, but I have it all under control. As for your money, I told you before, it's our assets pooled together." "Our assets?" I let out a humorless bark of laughter. "Wake up and smell the jail cell you've earned yourself. Those convoluted money trails and insider deals prove you bilked literally millions from my father's firm and my own accounts." Clay visibly paled at my words, but leveled his patented ice-cold glare my way. "You ungrateful little bitch. Is this the thanks I get for providing you a life of luxury? I'll bury you and that senile old prick Max in litigation until you're both bankrupt shells." White-hot anger spiked through me, momentarily stealing my breath at his callous arrogance. I stood there shaking with rage while he fumed and blathered more hollow threats and deflections. Finally, I raised my hand again, silencing his tirade. When I spoke, the tone was low and measured, yet laced with undisguised disgust. "Let me make one thing crystal clear, you sniveling worm. The free ride is over. No more embezzling from my family's hard-earned assets. No more living a champagne lifestyle by robbing from everyone around you with sociopathic glee." My gaze bored into his, ensuring he registered the full gravity and finality of my next words. "I want a divorce, Clay. And I'll make sure you're left with nothing but a future of hand-me-down suits and prison-issued jumpsuits once the law catches up to your racketeering." In that instant, any facade of control Clay maintained came crashing down in spectacular fashion. Letting out a feral roar of rage, he lunged across the marble table and grabbed me by the shoulders, his grip punishing and brutal. "You stupid, delusional whore. Everything I built, every bloody advantage and connection I've cultivated, was for us, for our future." He gave me a vicious shake, splattering spittle across my face. You'll never be anything more than a worthless trust fund brat without me. While part of me inwardly recoiled from the menacing violence radiating off him in waves, I remained utterly impassive, staring back at him with eyes made of granite. I'd prepared myself for the inevitability of his volcanic reaction to the truth. We're done here. I enunciated each word with surgical precision, refusing to give him an inch while twisting free of his grasp. The company and my father's legal team will deal with you appropriately from here on out. Snatching up the scattered papers and folders, I spun on my heel and strode for the suite door, movements cold and economical. I'd feigned bravery many times in the face of Clay's posturing before, but no longer. You dare walk away from me, you ungrateful little cunt! His voice dripped with venom and wounded ego as he grabbed my arm in a vice-like grip. I'll bury you in litigation hell until you... His spittle-laced tirade was cut short as a thick muscular arm clamped around his windpipe from behind, squeezing just shy of full restriction. The imposing form of my dad loomed over Clay's suddenly panicked expression. That's enough out of you, dirtbag. Max's tone was lethal calm as he shoved Clay backwards, allowing him to flounder and gasp for air. Threaten my little girl again, and the next grip crushes your trachea. The explosive introduction of my father's imposing presence clearly gave Clay pause, and he staggered back a few steps, knuckles whitening around his abused neck. I allowed myself a tight, triumphant smirk as I took in the scene. Guess we're done with the false pretenses and sugarcoating the truth. My father's company is pressing charges against you for embezzling over $5 million from the firm's client account. Not to mention the multiple fraud and tax evasion charges awaiting once the authorities start digging into your slush funds and bogus vendors. You have no proof. Clay wheezed, beads of sweat speckled across his flushed brow. My lawyers will grind this joke of an accusation into the dirt. My expression hardened. Don't insult our intelligence. Between the paper trail linking your offshore accounts to dozens of improper money transfers and Dean's verified records from within the firm, you're beyond cooked. Dad took a menacing step forward. Any minute now, the local police and feds will be swarming this hotel on our call. Plenty of proof to take you into custody while we build the criminal case against you. Clay's veneer of composure was crumbling rapidly. I could see the panic beginning to set in behind his eyes as the sheer futility of his situation dawned on him. Arya, think about what you're doing. You destroy me here, and I'll make sure you and your whole clueless family are destitute within a year. I let out a hollow peal of laughter, unfazed by his desperate threats. Keep flapping your gums, you degenerate snake. The only things you'll be making from now on are license plates and shivs for your new cellmates. Taking one last look at his sweaty, bulging-eyed countenance, I tossed the evidence folder at his feet in a contemptuous shower of documents. Thanks for the memories, Clayton. Your vile actions have freed me in ways you'll never understand. With that parting shot, I turned and strode from the room, my father falling into lockstep beside me. Sweet, heady relief washed over me with every passing step away from the soon-to-be prison-bound wretch. The worst was behind me. All that remained was basking in the restorative justice to come. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of police interviews, emergency board meetings at my father's company, and Clay's increasingly desperate attempts to bully his way out of the mounting charges. But Lena had the situation on ironclad legal lockdown. Armed with the comprehensive evidence we'd compiled, she deftly maneuvered past each of Clay's pitiful objections and stall tactics from his admittedly slick team of corporate lawyers. It all came to a head at an emergency board meeting convened to decide Clay's immediate fate with the company. With the Department of Justice breathing down our necks, a rapid resolution was required before the feds applied for an asset freeze on all revenue tied to his alleged fraud. This is a personal vendetta orchestrated by my estranged wife and her lunatic family. Clay's voice echoed through the stifling conference room as the proceedings kicked off. He stabbed a manicured finger at me where I sat flanked by Lena and Max. Arya has manufactured these wild fabrications out of spite because I dared file for divorce first. A low rumble of incredulous muttering filled the room from the assembled board members and executives. Even his staunchest old boy enablers seemed skeptical of that narrative given the overwhelmingly detailed evidence. "That's enough, Mr. Barrett." Roger Kingsley, CEO of our parent corporation, spoke in a clipped, no-nonsense tone as he rapped his knuckles on the glossy tabletop. "The forensic auditors and federal investigators have compiled more than enough documentation exposing your complex money laundering and theft from client accounts." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Clay's face go pallid, sweat beading on his taut brow. He opened his mouth to object, but Roger raised a solitary hand, silencing him. "Furthermore, bank records and electronic data trails show you repeatedly pillaged marketing funds and cash reserves to finance your lavish personal expenditures and indiscretions." The older man's eyes blazed with undisguised contempt behind his wireframe glasses. Clay's Adam's apple bobbed rapidly as each new damning revelation piled atop the last, effectively burying him in an avalanche of incriminating facts. "In light of this overwhelming evidence and the legal liability you represent, you're hereby stripped of all corporate authority and terminated for moral turpitude, effective immediately." Roger punctuated the statement by slamming his palm down on the table with a dull thud. "This is an outrageous miscarriage of justice." Clay shot to his feet, face mottled with fury as he shouted down at the impassive Kingsley. "When my legal team is through with your corrupt evidence and sham proceedings, none of you will have jobs." He whirled towards me, eyes mere slits of impotent rage. "You'll regret letting your psychotic need for revenge open this Pandora's box, Arya." At that moment, the double doors at the rear of the conference room banged open with a clatter. Two grim-faced U.S. Marshals in crisp blue windbreakers strode in, flanking a diminutive woman in a no-nonsense navy pantsuit. "Clayton Barrett?" The petite woman's voice carried a commanding presence that belied her stature as she addressed the now bewildered Clay. "My name is Sarah Wilkins, special agent with the FBI's Fraud Investigation Unit." She allowed the slightest hint of a thin smile to crease her severe features. "You're under arrest for multiple counts of money laundering, embezzlement, tax evasion, and corporate fraud. Anything you say can and will be used against you." For a moment, the room hung in stunned silence as two burly deputy marshals advanced and cuffed the now sputtering Clay, his jaw working furiously, but no words emerging. I turned a grateful eye towards Lena, who was sporting a rather self-satisfied grin as she watched her tormentor being hauled away, his expensive suit and disheveled hair the only remnants of the facade he'd so arrogantly maintained for years. "Don't look so smug just yet," a nasal voice snarled as Clay caught my eye. "You'll slip on a banana peel one of these days, Arya. And when you hit rock bottom with nothing and no one, maybe you'll appreciate the life I tried to build us." With that pathetic departing shot, the marshals wrestled Clay out of the room as Roger addressed the remaining shell-shocked assemblage. "Thank you all for your patience and discretion during this catastrophic legal matter. I assure you, once the dust settles, we'll rebuild Kingsley Marketing to be an even stronger firm, one where ethics and public trust aren't merely corporate platitudes." As the meeting dispersed amid a low buzz of scandal-tinged chatter, Lena pulled me aside with an almost feral look of vindicated triumph shining in her eyes. "Well, your lying, cheating snake of an ex just got his jaw-dropping comeuppance." Her smile was all shark-like bravado. "That smug prick won't know what hit him once the weight of the federal indictments really sinks in." Though I should have been elated at Clay's unceremonious apprehension and professional demise, an inexplicable pang of melancholy tugged at my chest as I headed home. Maybe it was the raw fury and hate still radiating off him like body heat, or the glaring truth that any remnant of the decent, driven man I fell for was permanently extinguished. Either way, the facade keeping us together as husband and wife had finally been obliterated, by my own hand, no less. I shuddered to think what Clayton's next moves might entail as the walls closed in. Whatever happened, I refused to surrender one more ounce of power or self-respect to that cancerous relationship. Clay's bombastic implosion and arrest were just the opening salvo in what would become a brutally drawn-out legal battle over the coming months. While federal prosecutors steadily built their sweeping racketeering case against him, my divorce attorneys initiated a blitzkrieg of personal litigation simultaneously. Armed with Lena's meticulous documentation of Clay's myriad financial crimes and personal indiscretions, they systematically dismantled the facade of his frivolous annulment filings, one after another. Within weeks, the galling reality of my inevitable full divorce and asset separation sunk in for the incarcerated Clay. He retaliated with the only tactics he knew: intimidation and unbridled cruelty. Venomous phone calls and letters arrived with escalating frequency, each more vile and threatening than the last, as he grew increasingly desperate in his quest for leverage. "Take a look at this latest missive from your sociopath ex-hubby." Lena tossed a crumpled sheaf of papers onto my kitchen counter one afternoon, mouth twisted with disgust. I scanned the pages with a weary sigh, unsurprised to find more of Clay's all-too-familiar bile regurgitated in angry, looping scrawls. Details of sordid sexual escapades and expletive-laced insults filled the rantings, clear attempts to shame and demean me. How original. More pathetic Mako intimidation when he can't win on merits. I tossed the pages aside, unfazed by his bluster at this point. Keep tabs on these unhinged tangents in case we need a restraining order. The fact was, Clay Barrett's downfall had accelerated into a horrifying death spiral, stripping away every vestige of the arrogant blue blood success he'd so carefully cultivated over the years. Within 6 months, every asset in his name, from the Hamptons Beach House to his beloved Mercedes-AMG Coupe and Patek Philippe watch collection, were liquidated and frozen to satisfy hundreds of thousands in mounting legal fees and potential restitution penalties. By the following fall, grim-faced federal agents arrived at the downtown luxury loft I'd purchased solely in my name and rousted Clay away to await trial. His previously buffed and groomed veneer was now replaced by a hunched, haunted look, dark circles engulfing his deadened eyes as marshals shackled and led him into a waiting transport van. "Don't get too comfortable in your ivory tower, sweetheart," he called over his shoulder at me, desperation and hatred dripping from his words. "Once I take these lying monsters down in court and prove my innocence, you'll be broke and homeless without me." I merely stared back at him, features blank and impassive, while inwardly marveling at how swiftly the mighty could crumble under the weight of their own sins and arrogance. My independence was secure. The last 2 years of meticulous legal groundwork by Lena and Max had ensured no messy asset retaliation or convoluted reversal of fortune. Clay would face his reckoning alone and destitute, exactly as I'd vowed. As the battered transport van pulled away with my disgraced ex in tow, I turned and headed back inside, the faintest ghost of a relieved smile teasing my lips. I was free. As the dust settled in the months following Clay's dramatic imprisonment and our acrimonious divorce finalization, a profound sense of relief and renewal washed over me. Gone were the constant mind games, the gaslighting, the endless cycle of walking on eggshells around his volatile ego and emasculated rage. For the first time in over a decade, I was beholden to no one but myself, free from the shackles of codependence and manipulation that Clay had so insidiously bound me with. The very notion made me want to shout from the rooftops in pure, uninhibited elation. Instead, I channeled that euphoric energy into reclaiming my sense of self-worth and blazing new trails, both personally and professionally. This new chapter demanded a clean slate. "You've paid your dues and conquered that sadistic monster, kiddo?" Dad clasped my shoulder affectionately as we strolled through the bustling downtown streets one crisp autumn evening. "Time to spread your wings and truly soar now that he can't hold you back." I gave him an appreciative smile and reciprocated the squeeze, marveling at how our previous fractures and strained codependency had mended throughout this tumultuous stretch. "Thanks, Dad. I couldn't have regained my footing without you and Lena relentlessly in my corner." "Don't thank me yet," he chuckled gruffly, waggling his eyebrows. "You've got the hard-driving business acumen that's kept this family soaring for decades. The company's marketing team is yours for the taking if you'll have it." While the prospect of leading my father's pride and joy venture filled me with no small trepidation, I couldn't deny the allure of that challenge, of proving I could helm a thriving enterprise by my own merits after everything with Clay. Embracing his poisoned legacy of deception and fear would be the ultimate cleansing rebirth. "You've got yourself a deal, old man." Squaring my shoulders defiantly, I allowed a self-assured grin to spread across my face. I'll make you proud and elevate that team to unprecedented heights. By the following spring, I'd firmly rooted myself as managing director of Kingsley Marketing, orchestrating a full-scale creative and strategic overhaul that propelled the once imperiled agency back into profitability. Every boardroom negotiation, every hard-won new client acquisition and ensuing celebration was a cold slap of validation that I'd finally untangled myself from Clay's toxic web. And indeed, any faint murmurs of my disgraced ex's lingering animosity vanished once he was remanded to federal prison on a dizzying array of fraud and financial laundering convictions. After smugly short-circuiting the legal process for months with a cavalcade of motions and delay tactics, that first shocking footage of Clayton being led shackled from the courthouse in a tattered blue jumpsuit spread like wildfire through our professional circles. By all accounts, he faced a harsh, uncompromising stretch of 15 to 20 years behind bars, with financial penalties astronomical enough to ensure he'd never reclaim his previously high-flying lifestyle and ego upon release. Yet in stark contrast to his humiliating downfall, I found myself scaling new professional peaks and embracing profound personal growth daily. Quickly establishing a reputation as a dynamic leader with integrity and vision, I fielded a dizzying array of career opportunities beyond the Kingsley umbrella. Turning down those lucrative offers was as gratifying as shedding those final invisible shackles of my traumatic marital past. Instead, I poured my energies into not just professional achievements, but selflessly mentoring other women striving to sidestep the cycles of domestic turmoil and subjugation that I'd narrowly escaped, inspiring them to harness their innate self-worth and chart their own ambitious courses, just as Lena and my father had shown me in my darkest hours. At last, I was the master of my own destiny, a thriving phoenix risen from the ashes of Clayton Barrett's twisted agenda with wings spanning ever further horizons. No longer would I be defined by his deceptions and cruelties, or wilt under his stifling control. I'd confronted those shadows head-on and emerged reborn into the self-possessed, confident woman I was always meant to become.